3.5 years into my degree, I think I have a good idea of what it's like for students. The pharmacy curriculum is very dense and demanding in terms of content, and because of this, I feel like students don't really get the chance to think about why or how they're learning because we're so focused on the what portion of it. The core competency framework is a set of competencies that any pharmacist in Ireland must demonstrate in order to be registered. It covers a range of behaviours and skills, but in particular it places emphasis on reflecting on practice and lifelong learning. This term I'm assessed against this framework by my preceptor, who makes sure I tick off each item on the list, but from my findings on ePortfolios, I propose that they could be a better alternative or supplement to this. To me, I think the biggest challenge with ePortfolios is getting students to engage with them in a way that's unlike a traditional written assessment or assignment. If they're being used for summative assessments or for accreditation, I think there's this risk that students will base their artifacts or reflections on what they think the assessor wants to hear, and so the portfolio doesn't really become a true representation of themselves or their learning. In terms of technology, if the technology is too structured or scaffolded, again, students will start to feel like they're just doing another written assignment. But on the other hand, if it's not scaffolded enough, students will waste their time trying to figure out little technical bits, and it takes away from the true essence of ePortfolios, which is a space to reflect and integrate your learning. We also can't assume students are able to reflect to a high standard. If I were to look back on my reflections from previous years, I'm sure they'd be very superficial, and it's only through doing this placement and looking at topics like ePortfolios that I've been able to reflect on a deeper level. If used correctly, I think ePortfolios would give students the opportunity to track their learning over time and integrate their knowledge learned within college, outside of college, and also on placements. They would also help us develop the reflecting skills we need and represent our CPD throughout the placement. And we could also take sections of these ePortfolios and use them in future job interviews, help us stand out in the process. And they'd also prepare us for keeping our ePortfolios that we're legally obliged to keep when we practice after graduation. From my findings, I think implementing an ePortfolio approach to the current pharmacy curriculum would include the following. Before students can start making their own ePortfolios, they have to be brought up to speed on what ePortfolios are, what they can gain from them, what the purpose of them is, and how to reflect on a deeper level. We should also be supported and guided through how to make different types of artifacts, whether those are written or digital ones. Any rubrics that are developed should be given to students early on in the process so that we can use them to guide our ePortfolio making. And I think it's important that these rubrics don't mark students down for including details of errors, but they should reward students for reflecting and learning from these experiences. And I think in doing this, you get rid of some of that performative behaviour that I mentioned earlier. The structure of the ePortfolios should be linked to the core competency framework because this is what's being assessed. I think it should also be linked to the ePortfolio requirements of the Irish Institute of Pharmacists, but at the same time I think there should be enough freedom for students to personalise them and take ownership of them, and therefore take ownership of their learning. And since ePortfolios are supposed to be living portals, I think the ePortfolio shouldn't just be confined to the 16 weeks we're on placement, but they should tie in with ePortfolios from other years of the degree and also with what students do in the second term of fourth year. As a future pharmacist, fingers crossed, it's not just important what I learn, although that is important, but I think it's just as important why I learn and how I learn, and how this shapes my professional identity and improves my ability to serve society. And I think ePortfolios, given that I truly engage with them and the process of making them, capture all of this. Thank you.